I would like to begin this talk by telling you a little parable that I think reminds us that seed sovereignty and sustainability and self-sufficiency are related to the land sovereignty, the water sovereignty issues, that just as that ceremony, I think, portrayed in one way, to take care of the seeds, we also have to make sure that the lands and waters are protected in an integrated way, and that the things that can impinge upon the seeds and the care that the traditional growers of those seeds give to them, that outside pressures are not affecting them in strange and inadvertent ways that diminish the value of the seeds. But I would like to start out with just a moment of silence of gratitude for all the farmers and gardeners who in this valley have produced seeds year after year in an unbroken chain for perhaps 4,000 years. So just a moment of silence and gratitude for them. One thing that I think is so strange at this moment in time, given that there's been that unbroken chain for 4,000 years, is how many strange and accidental and weird ways at one level, and at another level, they're insidious pressures, how so many things can disrupt that chain of passing the seeds on from hand to hand. And I'd like for all of you to imagine taking your favorite aunt and uncle from where you live into town to, say, a doctor's office. And when they're done with their doctor's appointment, your elderly aunt says, "Before we go back home, can you take me over to Walmart to get some toilet paper? We don't have any toilet paper in the house." Okay? And while your aunt is looking for the toilet paper in the place, your uncle goes out to the Walmart garden shop and he gets a six-pack. Not a six-pack to drink, but a six-pack of chili plants. Okay? He doesn't know where those chili plants come from. You're coming back to a valley where everyone has grown chili plants for hundreds of years. And those chili plants are either a hybrid chili, or now, because genetic engineering has begun on chili peppers, in the future they could be a genetically engineered chili. And your uncle, who may be 75 years old, hasn't read any of this stuff, hasn't been listening to Clayton Brascoupe talk about this for the last 10 years, just inadvertently picks up 6 chili plants that then, when he plants them, have the capacity to contaminate the chilies, the same chili that's been in the valley for hundreds of years. Next stop is your uncle saying, "Oh, and we're out of hay for the animals. Why don't we stop and get a couple bales of alfalfa on the way back before we go home, right as we leave town?" Stop at a feed store, and while he's getting the hay, your aunt or grandmother or whatever buys a little 10-pound bag of feed corn. And that feed corn looks like all the feed corn that she's bought there over the years. But over the last 10 years or so, 12 years or so, it's become genetically engineered corn. Not all eating corn, sweet corn, is genetically engineered now, but most feed corn is. In fact, by the second or third year of introducing GMO corn to the world, it was on 60% of the U.S. acreage for feed corn. Okay, so inadvertently, your aunt or your abuela is all of a sudden taking a bag of corn to feed to the chickens, and this time it's genetically engineered, and one of the nephews or something is carrying it out to the chicken coop near the cornfield. It breaks, and there's a whole trail of seeds along the side of the field that then that year or the next year contaminates the corn that's been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, with genetically engineered corn. Stories like this is how the corn has gotten into Chihuahua, into the Sierra Tarahumara, and that's what some of the photos, the gorgeous photos like that you looked at lunch. That's how it's gotten into Oaxaca. And at one level it seems, quote, accidental, right? Because your aunts and uncles don't know that that's genetically engineered. At another level, there's been a decade of people asking for genetically engineered crops to be labeled so that these accidents don't happen, to have more monitoring, to have places where those genetically engineered crops cannot be grown, and yet they're still being grown in those places because the government has refused to label them, has refused to do the kind of monitoring and protection not only for human safety, but for the safety of wildlife and for the safety of other people. And some people are making money off those accidents, and some people are losing the value of the resources that have been in their hands and their families' hands for thousands of years. In 1978, when our government tried to equalize our laws with the common market through something called the Plant Variety Protection Act, which was sort of a fast track for the certification or patenting of plants, so that those patents would have get our system in sync with the European one, so that the same kinds of corns could be broadly sold in both places. There were 3 of us who got beat up in the U.S. Congress in the hearings. Only 3 people talked against the patenting of life. And in particular, that was the first time Congress heard that the patenting of life and the spread of these hybrids and now of the GMOs could have detrimental effects on the native crops. I nearly lost my job over it because the University of Arizona said to me, "You can't take a political position, and besides, everyone else in the ag school is for that." In other words, I couldn't take a political position, but the rest of the ag school that was getting money from multinational corporations to do crop work could take a political position. So sort of doublespeak. So that sped up the commercialization and high stakes gambling that has happened with plant breeding, and has meant that the companies are more than ever before intent on making tons of money and having only a few varieties out in the field because each one costs so much. In 1978, when we just simply spoke out against plant certification of conventionally bred plants, cost about $50,000 for plant breeders to get a new hybrid out into the marketplace. Now for the genetically engineered crops, it costs them about $1 million of research, development, and marketing so that they can try to make their money back in 3 years off that variety before they start seeing the problems that are happening. About 10 years ago, when it was obvious that GMO corn, the BT corn that had toxins bred into it to kill corn earworm and corn rootworm, when it became clear that those toxins were also killing monarch butterflies, both in laboratory tests and in the fields, the Center for Food Safety and Union of Concerned Scientists and Natural Resources Defense Council, I was one of the plaintiffs on the case to try to get the government to stop that. They pulled it off the market, but they wouldn't honor our case that it was breaking federal wildlife laws because they'd never tested for the impact on endangered butterflies in the area where the corn was grown. They never looked at the health effects either. In a series of stepwise progressions, we now have these companies gaining more power than they've ever had, rather than being monitored and controlled more than ever before. There are, however, strategies that I just want to talk briefly about that I think can help us get to a point where we're less vulnerable to these so-called accidents, so that your grandfather or grandmother or aunt or uncle, even though you may be an activist that wants to control these things, they may not be so vulnerable to these incidents that bring these things into our agricultural valleys. As a case in point, I want to let you know that when New Mexico State University tested the chilies up here in the valleys, the Chimayo and the Alhuique and the other ones from the northern New Mexico pueblos and Hispanic communities, about 7 of the 19 ones that they tested had already been contaminated with hybrids from, not GMOs, but hybrids that other land-grant colleges had released, like the Weslaco Texas jalapeno peppers had crossed, because they had indeed been grown nearby the old-time chiles. And the bees and the other insects that move pollen from one chile to the next had indeed contaminated about a third of the distinctive chili varieties in northern New Mexico with pollen from hybrid chilies. That was before genetically engineered chili peppers were out in the landscape here. But that same process can happen just that easily with GMO chilies, as it already has been with hybrid chilies like the Big Jim and the College 64 and some of the ones that the different universities have created. What that means is that the intrinsic value of each of those distinctive seeds that's been in this area for hundreds of years, that some of you have collected, nurtured, passed on to other people, made sure that they go to the next generation, that the value of those as a distinctive product, like Chimayo chili is being diminished by this contamination by these outside sources. So we don't know which Chimayo growers are really growing Chimayo chili anymore. I feel that the other chiles in northern New Mexico, what most people just call native New Mexican chilies, are as valuable as that. But because of worries like this, the last time I was up at the village of Chimayo, people said, we're not sharing seed with anyone. We're not even sharing chili powder with anyone. The price of real, authentic Chimayo chili powder is more expensive than cocaine up here. And the point is that they were protecting it and safeguarding it so that it could not get into the hands of people that might grow it next to other fields where these hybrid chilies are now being grown. So let me talk about the strategies that we have to control this. And probably some of you have been involved in sacred lands issues. You know that we have the Native American Religious Freedom Act and Restoration Act, that we have the American Antiquities Act. In almost every case where indigenous people and their allies have saved a sacred place, it's not because of those laws alone. They can draw attention to those laws to protect the site, but they have to layer concern after concern. They have to say, there's endangered eagles up there, and indeed eagles are protected by the Endangered Species Act. That sacred mountain has value to the wildlife people as well. It's our sacred mountain that should be protected by the Religious Freedom Act, but we're going to tell you all the reasons it's protected. It needs to be protected. And so the people who've been successful in protecting sacred lands have layered one reason after another on top of things, one law after another, to show that the land should be protected. And that's how the San Francisco Peaks were just protected from an expansion of ski development. The same is true with seeds. rather than thinking that we can just do a GMO-free zone for all of the Rio Grande Valley or Rio Bravo Valley or the Rio Arriba Valley, whatever you want to call it. We have to have multiple ways of protection to help everyone in this valley understand the many reasons for keeping these seeds pure. And how many of you know Miguel Santisteban? He said something very, very funny the last year. He said, you know, just doing a GMO zone and putting signs up on the edge of a reservation is legal to do that because the different pueblos have a government-to-government relationship with the federal government. So the New Mexico legislation that says there can't be a GMO zone in the state is null and void because you guys have status equal to the state in that sense. But he said just doing a GMO zone is like putting up signs that say this is a burglary-free zone. Okay? Everyone pays attention to those signs except the burglars. And the same thing is true with the way GMOs get in. The way they get in are through all these insidious ways. So tribes should move to having GMO-free zones just like the Traverse Bay Band of folks in Michigan have done, declaring their whole reservation a GMO-free zone. But there are other mechanisms that you can use to layer on top of that. One of them is that this area has, within, I don't know how long, maybe some of you can correct me, has become a national heritage area. I think it's from Albuquerque north. Does anyone know any more about that? We're working on 2 of those, one with Navajo and Hopi and Zuni people for the Little Colorado River watershed, and another one down with the Tohono and the Yoemim or Yaqui people in the Santa Cruz watershed, and everyone knows about it. I'm surprised that people up here don't know that your your congressmen and senators have gotten through a national heritage area for this area. That allows $10 million over the next 15 years, $10 million of federal money to go to agricultural lands protection, cultural preservation, historic preservation, riparian restoration, and the development of agricultural and ecological tourism in this area. That could help establish a larger GMO-free zone. It could also provide money to help all the projects that are trying to get youth involved in maintaining the seed crops in this area. It can allow the different pueblos to do sell their own products and do startup of new product development based on this. And that money in other national heritage areas has been matched by about 9 to 10 times that amount from state and private and local sources once they begin to get the federal money rolling in. So every pueblo should be trying to use the land, this national heritage area designation that applies to private lands and tribal lands. None of that money can go to the federal or state governments. It has to be used by private farmers and tribal farmers or people doing building preservation or whatever within this zone. That money should be used to create such a strong agriculture that an insult like GMOs cannot even get in here. Underscoring why these crops are distinct, what their history is, their benefits to the whole heritage of the whole area, and use that as a larger buffer to protect against the GMOs. Some of this involves documentation of what's already there. What I mean by that is that some tribes have an aversion to universities or the government coming in and documenting what they have in terms of their agriculture. Okay? But one of the key things is if you don't document what seeds you have now, if you don't have a tribal seed bank like some of you have already started, when something is lost and there's damages like that, you have no way of telling the outside world that you've had something that's then damaged or lost because of GMOs or another factor. So a number of people who've been at this conference, Clayton, Joel Glansberg, John, have been involved in efforts over the years to help tribes have their own seed banks that at least are a living collection of what has been part of your history. One thing that you can do to augment that is seed repatriation, similar to the other kinds of repatriation that nearly every tribe in the Southwest has been involved in. So with Hopi Cultural Preservation Office, Native Seed Search, and my center at NAU wrote every single government seed bank, botanical garden, museum, nonprofit, and individual farmer that we could find that was growing so-called Hopi crops and asked for seeds back. And now that was the largest seed repatriation in American history, and other tribes should be doing that too, and establishing with photos and historic documentation with elders what all those seeds mean. So it's a funny thing. We're repatriating pots because of their importance to our community and human remains, but the living treasures that our future generations may need as well, we're not saying we can repatriate that too, okay? So every tribe should be thinking about going to those sources, and I could help you with that process of talking about how you get seed repatriation cranking up, getting things from the U.S. government seed banks, from zoos and botanical gardens, and all those other things I mentioned. That documentation, if it's just photos and descriptions of how it's been used, can keep these things from being patented, okay? So there's fears among certain tribes about doing that kind of documentation because information can be used against you as well as for you. But with a number of people in the Southwest, we had a workshop to put together a book on the traditional foods of Chili Pepper Nation that documents when all these things first came into the Southwest, what tribes shared them, whether they were also shared with Hispanic communities, how long they've been in here, and just a couple lines about what they look like and their distinctive characteristics. Documentation like that has kept the Anasazi bean from being patented, has kept beans in northern Mexico, azufrados, from being patented, because it shows that those things were in the public domain and part of tribal traditions prior to someone commercializing and saying they did some little breeding to make it a better Anasazi bean or whatever. So that kind of documentation, just a few lines, can show that this has been part of the heritage of the region and therefore should not be patented. Okay? There's other things that can be done that are trickier. One of the things is that if a plant breeder takes a gene from a traditional seed, whether he or she uses genetic engineering techniques or conventional plant breeding techniques, if they mix it with a bunch of other genes, they can say they have a new product and deserve a patent. If the unique trait of that is from a tribal seed, the tribe should be involved in that process, should help make the decision whether that's commercialized or not, whether they want benefits to be shared with them, or whether they don't want to see it on the market. So once things get past people just selling traditional seeds as they are, and they're using them for crop improvement, a whole set of other issues come in. But there are also strategies that tribes can do to get in the face and in the meeting room with those companies to say, you can't use that without our permission. If our fathers and grandfathers did 90% of the work for you, and you're doing the icing on the cake. Okay? To my knowledge, very few, if any, southwestern seeds have been used in that kind of plant breeding thing. In fact, one of the irony is that we have more plants, wild plants, that are currently under genetic engineering in this region than the cultivated plants that the tribes have grown. The wild foods, things like cottonwood, in other regions, things like salmon are being engineered. So we have to watch this whole issue for wild resources that are used for kachinas, for foods and medicines, just as much as we have to watch it for cultivated plants. And then be at the negotiating table and in the room with organizations that are tracking and monitoring this stuff to make sure that those companies aren't profiting off hundreds and thousands of years of your community getting those, what I would like to say, co-creating those cultivated varieties. I don't think humans are the only creators of the seeds. I think if we think we're the creators of them, we're arrogantly acting like the plant breeders are, that take something that already has great value and saying that we made it greater. So the point of view that I'm trying to get across is documenting these things is in the tribe's best interest. Having a seed bank is in your best interest, and you don't have to share that documentation with anyone until there's a threat. Finally, I want to say that there's one last Finally, there's a whole new mechanism for bringing these rare foods back to the marketplace that we've developed through collaborations with Slow Food and a consortium of groups, including Cultural Conservancy that Melissa Nelson runs, a native-based organization in California, and Native Seed Search based in Tucson that Alexandro from Jemez Pueblo is Indigenous Programs Officer for. And that's doing recovery projects in the communities that were the original stewards of the seeds or breeds to bring them back into the marketplace so that food can be in the schools, in the elderly homes, in the hospitals, on reservations, or sold to native chefs or other people in the community for catered events or feasts. Slow Food is now one of the largest organizations in the world doing food activism. There's 160 chapters around the U.S. They have something called the Arc of Taste that says a food is rare enough and delicious enough and has enough history within its community that it needs to be honored, just like a Hall of Fame of great Native American musicians or a museum full of the work of great Native American artists. That does not mean that other people get to commercialize that. That's saying that it needs to be recognized as a great American food that has now become rare. Once it's on that list, the foods are eligible for what Slow Food calls Presidia projects that help recover the foods so that more growers in the community are given resources to do it. Sometimes it's buying harvesting equipment for a specialized crop or doing other kinds of things that move it along in addition to the promotion and marketing. Navajo Churro sheep have just become one of the recovery projects or Presidia projects for Slow Food USA. For the first time, Navajo-grown Navajo Churro sheep have been at Slow Food events in the last 2 years. For the first time, there's restaurants in Arizona that have Navajo Churro sheep lamb on the menu every day for the first time in over a century. There's a collective of about 8 Navajo producers that are coordinating their activities when it's possible to get their lamb to the butcher shop. They're getting as much as $8 a pound for their lamb retail, $6 wholesale, which is far better than what they were getting before. Other people are doing similar things with the wool that wasn't even worth the value of shearing it 8 years ago, and now some people are getting $2.50 a pound raw wool and up to 90 pounds for hand-dyed, hand-spun Navajo Churro wool that's registered. So that's creating local markets for the foods that are traditional in this area, because if our kids can't make a living off farming or ranching, they will do other things. One part of seed sovereignty is making sure that the farmers that value this stuff have a chance to make a living equal to what they could do having an office job. If we can't guarantee that people can be farmers in the future, maybe it doesn't matter if GMO pollen is flying all over the place. We have to make sure our kids have the dream of being farmers. And so having markets for them where they can sell this to community centers, can sell it legally to the schools. There's a bunch of crappy laws that make it tough for local farmers to even sell their food to the school where their kids go to for 6 hours every day. If we can't lower those barriers, I don't see how these crops are going to be maintained. So seed sovereignty is more than just dealing with the seeds. It's dealing with that whole ecological and economic sphere that either makes it hard for people to be farmers or makes it easier. If any of you want to know more about the Renewing America's Food Traditions program, whatever, we have one little brochure that I don't think we have enough copies for everyone, but Lori's going to, okay, it'll be at the back table. There's one directory of Native American farmers, fishermen, foragers, and hunters who sell their surplus to people. We're encouraging that most of them sell them to Native American chefs and people who now know how to present it in the appropriate way. And then there's another brochure from the Oral History Project with these farmers that Melissa Nelson and the Cultural Conservancy staff is doing. So that's all I need to say, and I'm happy to take some questions. Yeah, in the back. No, the guy behind you had his hand up first. I can't hear you. Chiltepines. Yeah, the wild chilies that are in the marketplace in the U.S. that you get in Mexican grocery stores are mostly from Mexico, but the wild chilies also grow in parts of Arizona, formerly grew in southern New Mexico, and grow down in West Texas. There's only about 14 populations of those wild chilies north of the border. They're now being grown on a small scale at the Native Seed Search Heritage Farm in Patagonia, but we've also set up a protected area in the mountains with the Forest Service where only traditional harvesting of the wild chilies can go on by the Hispanic and Autumn people that traditionally harvested in that area. It's on Forest Service land, but it's a botanical area, especially to keep that food resource alive. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about that situation. There's a number of strategies on how to prevent things from being patented and privatized, and I would suggest talking with the woman right behind you, Carol Thompson, who's just done the book on biopiracy and biodiversity, because she knows a lot more about that than I do. Yeah, John. I was going to bring that up earlier, that because the fear of this is so great in the Midwest, where basically in every county all this GMO pollen is floating around, even places like the Seed Savers Exchange has had to put their corn in the middle of their land so it can't be contaminated by stuff from surrounding farms. But there's a place out of Fairfield, Iowa. Does anyone know where the Transcendental Meditation College is? Is that the right town, Fairfield? Yeah, that they have a newsletter that lists all the testers in the whole United States, and the cost of that is coming down. So it's, I think, something like $15 a sample is what people told me for the GMO corn. It may be more for GMO to verify whether your stuff has been contaminated by GMO chilies or soybeans or whatever else might be out there. But I would suggest that if the key thing is putting aside some of the stuff that you know is pure, like we've always talked about, and testing that to make sure it's pure, and then every couple years monitor the stuff particularly if you have a non-indigenous farmer adjacent to you that you know is growing some new kind of corn or whatever. And what we were talking about earlier is people have to say, as cow's blue corn has its own intrinsic value. If that value is diminished by this contamination, there has to be damages. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I'm around and happy to talk with you if you have any other questions. Thank you.